Hello, everyone. Thank you so much for joining this meeting. My name is Diego, and I work for the Historic Districts Council. Today, we're having another meeting of the Upper Manhattan Preservation Group. This is an initiative which is led by Matthew Spady. And today, we have a special group with us, Save Harlem Now. They're going to be talking about their experience in preservation, specifically the designation of the Central Harlem Historic District. So I'm very happy that you joined. And if you have any questions, feel free to type them on the chat, or at the end, you can also ask some questions. So welcome, Matthew.
Thanks, Diego. Thanks very much. Thanks to everyone for joining us tonight. As Diego just said, we have a really wonderful panel with us from all board members and officers of Save Harlem Now. And we're going to talk about the success that Save Harlem Now had with the Central Harlem 130th to 132nd Historic District. Let's start with a round of brief introductions. Valerie, let's start with you, President of Save Harlem Now. Would you say a couple of words about yourself?
Okay, good evening, and thank you all for joining us here today as we share some of our adventures in the land of historic preservation. As Matthew said, I'm president of Save Harlem Now, and I'm an advocate in Harlem and a business owner. And I also even wrote a book about the touring Harlem, and that was Central, East, and West Harlem, which is the, I guess, definitive book about touring Harlem that encompasses all of Harlem. I'm very glad to be here this evening, and I'm happy to share what I know.
Thanks so much, Valerie. And we also have Angel Anjon, who is the Vice President of Save Harlem Now.
Thank you for the invitation. My name is Angel Anjon. I'm an architect and preservationist. I have a firm dedicated to historic preservation in New York City, and we deal primarily with existing buildings. But when I'm not running my firm, I am often dedicated to other preservation issues throughout the city, and in particularly in Harlem, a place very dear to my heart. I lived there for more than 10 years. I was really involved with the effort to save the Fire Watchtower. And through that effort, I got to meet Valerie many moons ago and worked with her on that, and eventually became involved in the effort to continue to do more to preserve Harlem's refined cultural legacy by being part of this national organization, Save Harlem Now. And I'm happy to be here with all my friends and colleagues to talk a little bit more about the work that we've been doing and what we hope to continue to do.
Thanks very much, Angel. And we also have with us Roberto Washington. Evening, Roberto, would you introduce yourself?
Hi. I'm also an architect and also very interested in preservation, of course. I was once on a community board, the local community board, where I worked with some of the same issues that are causing the problems that we're looking at now. And I served on the New York Preservation Commission, Historic Preservation Commission for 7 years. And so some of my experiences there are what I'm trying to carry over into this work with Save Harlem Now.
Thanks, Roberta. And we also have Lisa Rachel Nicky with us. Rachel, welcome. And would you say a couple of words about yourself?
Thank you, Matthew. I have been a Harlem homeowner for, I guess, 10 years now. And I think through this talk, you will sort of see how I became I guess, first became involved in just sort of my block association and the community board within Harlem. And then how that led to my becoming involved with Save Harlem Now and working on preservation, particularly in Harlem.
Thanks. Thanks to all of you. In the interest of full disclosure, I should mention that I'm also on the board of Save Harlem Now, although I joined it when the Central Harlem Historic District was well underway. So I was only on the end of that, but I did think I better mention that. So let's get started here and talk a little bit about, I'm gonna give you just a brief background in where the Central Harlem Historic District is and what it represents. I'm just gonna take a couple of sentences from the designation report. The Historic District is a significant enclave of residential architecture representative of Central Harlem's first major phase of development, and a remarkable reminder of the substantial role that the African-American community of Harlem played in creating political and social change in New York City and in the nation. So right from the start, just from that opening sentence in the designation report, we know that the district is important for its architectural significance, but also for its cultural significance. That's a really important factor here in the designation of this particular historic district. In case you're not sure where it is, here's a map of Manhattan on the left, and you see the Empire State Building down there and Central Park, and of course, moving up into Harlem. And here's an arrow that gives you an idea where the Central Harlem Historic District is. On the right, you see a map of it. It's outlined there in red. It covers the mid-blocks of West 130th, 131st, and 132nd between Lenox and 7th Avenue. So that gives you just a brief introduction to get you oriented as to where the area is that we're talking about and the historical, architectural, and cultural significance that we're going to be talking about as we move along. So now, let's start off, Valerie, with you, please. And with Save Harlem Now, played a huge role in getting this historic district designated. But let's go back to the start, because I think Save Harlem Now existed before you actually began this project. Is that correct?
Yes, it is correct. And in fact, we were founded in 2015 out of a frustration of losing an important landmark, the Renaissance. And Michael Henry Adams, who almost single-handedly led the protest and was even arrested for it, held several demonstrations every Sunday about the fact that the Abyssinia Development Corporation, which had sold the Renaissance, which is a historic building that is dear and near to the hearts of most old-time Harlemites, because it was a club and a site where basketball was played. The Rennies were the basketball team, but it was very pivotal in Harlem's life because it's where Harlem people went to dance and hear music, and not at the Cotton Club because we couldn't, and at many of the other places that people reminisce about in terms of the Harlem Renaissance and what it did. Actually, people went to the Renaissance to hear music, to have retirement parties, to have Sweet 16 parties, to have cotillions. It's just a whole documentation of that. And the Renaissance was built by two men of color from Montserrat. And once they lost the place, it stood vacant for many, many years and began to deteriorate. And then Abyssinia Development Corp purchased the building and then subsequently sold it to a Black developer who knocked it down and built affordable condos. And this was at a great loss to the Harlem community. And so a group of us, architects, historians, preservationists, community activists got together and formed Harlem Now to have a unified voice that could begin to look at the built heritage of Harlem as well as other irreplaceable items in Harlem, to begin to look at things proactively rather than reactively in an effort to save Harlem. So we came together to advocate for preserving and celebrating Harlem's irreplaceable built heritage, in addition to the fact we not only were about saving individual outstanding structures, but also to preserve contextual buildings, landscapes, and other elements that contribute to saving to Harlem's sense of place and special character. And our collaborative efforts are aimed at enriching Harlem's quality of life through continuity with the past while enhancing awareness and our local economy.
Thanks very much, Valerie. So you have an organization which has gotten started. And then, Angel, I think the initial idea for the Central Harlem Historic District wasn't necessarily that particular district, but that there were a number of places that could be preserved. How did you sort of get to this point? What were the next steps that happened?
Yes, so I, being an architect, being involved with preservation and having been involved with historic preservation in Harlem, I was fully aware of the preservation plan that CB10 had put together in 2012, which I have read, and I thought that was a pretty comprehensive document that in essence called for preservation throughout the community board, proposing a number of historic districts and individual landmarks. So the two maps that you have on the left on the screen, the one on the left is really taken from CB10's historic preservation plan. And in essence, it shows a number of districts that have been proposed there. Suffice to say that number 7 down here, it's actually the extension of the Mount Morris Park Historic District. And actually that is shown in blue. So anyway, what happened is that we had Save Harlem Now have just come together in 2015. And we were in the middle of getting our bearings and our 501c3 and so on. And I actually happened to attend an event in 2016, in February 24, 2016 to be precise. And it was an event called Preservation and Place, a discussion on community development and historic preservation. It was an event that had been organized by Pratt Institute's Historic Preservation Program and the James Marston Fitch Charitable Foundation. The event took place in the city, downtown, in the Pratt's building in Manhattan. And one of the two participants was the then chair of the commission, the Landmarks Commission, Meenakshi Srinivasan. And Commissioner Srinivasan, she was asked during the presentation something along the lines of, Chair, what else can communities do to try to get landmarks to react to communities' needs and increase landmark designations? And the chair provided her response. And one of the things she said is, I think it would be really useful if community boards or if communities would actually do their part and present and put together a preservation plan. And she literally said, for instance, CB10 prepared a really well comprehensive preservation plan that we've looked at, and I think that this would be a really good reference and guidance for other communities to replicate. And having heard that, at the end of the event, I approached the chair and say, "Hi, I'm Angel. I'm from Save Harlem Now, the new organization. And we're trying to increase landmark designations in Harlem. So can we talk?" And we that's how we started a relationship with the commission. And we actually had to say we were extremely lucky that we got a really good reaction from the commission, and they were receptive, and we had a series of meetings with them. I think they came to CB10. We had a meeting at where Save Harlem Now and the commission came to a CB10 meeting, and we talk about our express intent on pursuing the historic district and individual landmarks, a proposal that had been included in the CB10 comprehensive plan. As you can see in the map on the left, there were at least 9 districts and a handful of individual landmarks and an interior landmark that were being proposed in this community board alone. And I think that actually led to a discussion with landmarks about priorities, but also about really understanding what's in those places. And I think this is where the next kind of fun idea came about, which was about having them more involved with what the content of all these many districts. So here's some photograph and some kind of like a collage of what you could find in all of these districts, about 8 of them. And we had at that time, we had starting to do 2 things. We had started to have a discussion among ourselves in terms of boundaries. And we were saying, well, Save Harlem Now, we want to work from river to river, north of 110 to 135th. We don't have really tight boundaries. But when we have all of these historic districts that we want to propose or that have been proposed in the past, we really need to understand conditions. So we had started to prepare to do the field work to really have a better sense of the boundaries that we were proposing to support CB10's effort and recommendations, and to prepare ourselves as a group to have an informed discussion with the commission that would support whatever CB10 have proposed. So here's in a nutshell a few of the many wonderful assets in this illustration from literally a bricks and mortar architectural history and architectural character perspective that you can find in all of these districts. So I'll stop there so that maybe we can talk about what else we did.
Thanks very much for that that overview of what was going on. I think this slide is really wonderful because it has all of these possibilities of historic districts listed there, but also these wonderful photographs. And I think, didn't these come from a study that Save Harlem Now put together?
Yeah. So what we did is that if you were to step back one slide, there were 2 maps, and I would talk about the map on the right. The map on the right was a map that Save Harlem Now put together, kind of proposing, confirming the historic district boundaries for each of the districts that have been proposed in by CB10 in 2012, but with the understanding that, for instance, at that point, the Mount Morris Park Historic District extension had already been nominated. So in 2015, the commission actually designated the extension. But if you look in yellow here, the extension, the district extension did not go as far as what had been proposed in CB10, right? Which is that number 7 that included Allen Clayton Powell Boulevard. So because of that, and also because of after we had a better sense of what was happening on these District 6 and 8, Manhattan Avenue North and Morningside Avenue, and with an understanding of the really fast pace of development and change that is happening on that area on Manhattan Avenue and St. Nicholas, we felt that it would be important for us to kind of walk the talk, literally, and hit the road and have a sense of what the district boundaries were and what were we proposing to the commission. So in this case, for instance, we ended up proposing, well, fine, you didn't include Allen Clayton Powell from maybe 116 to 120 and 24th, I think, that was included in the proposal from CB10. But I think that's fine. What we want to do is this old number 9 district for St. Nicholas Avenue, we really want to rename it as Allen Clayton Powell Boulevard. And then that should be a district that encompasses St. Nicholas Avenue. We believe that Allen Clayton Powell Boulevard, it's really, as Henry Michael Allen said, the Harlem's Champs-Élysées, and I think it really is. I have really wonderful, beautiful memories of walking from my place on 121st to Central Park and just going down in the summer and going down through Allen Clayton Powell Boulevard, that canopy of trees, really beautiful, beautiful experience. The people on the street, it's just amazing. So a lot of these trees, and I think the photo of the very right, on the bottom right, is one, it's kind of like a winter shot of Allen Clayton Powell. And then there were a number of districts of individual districts, individual buildings that had also been proposed by CB10. On the lower left-hand side, you have the library on 124th Street, which is one that in 2012, the community board was saying this has to be designated, and we're happy. We were very happy a couple of weeks to testify in favor of the designation of this building at a public hearing. So yes, what is important, what these maps and what all these photo collage tells you, it's that there is an underrepresentation of landmarks in Harlem. And that's really the need that we needed to tackle. I think we've been unapologetic about it, and we wanted to really just change that. So these are some of the districts. For instance, this is the names of these districts are the ones that are in the CB10 Historic District. This is the Lafayette Historic District, named after the Lafayette Theater, which has since been demolished, and this is what they eventually ended up designating. And so on the left, you see the CB10 map, and on the right, the say Harlem Now proposed boundaries from 2017. On the next slide, and here's some of the buildings. One of the things that became really clear to us was, number one, the really amazing degree of integrity that is on these districts. One of the questions that we posed to the commission when they asked us to prioritize was, how do we do that? Do we go by the low-hanging fruits that are obvious districts that have a significant amount of cultural significance, but also material integrity, or do we go for the ones that are, more threatened? So anyway, this photograph speak by themselves in terms of the quality of the asset that remains there.
I think an interesting thing that I learned in talking to folks with Save Harlem Now is that when you started off, as you were just describing, that you started a dialogue with LPC instead of just beginning with an RFE, a request for evaluation, which is how most people begin. And then once you got this dialogue going, you invited them up. And Valerie, I think you took folks from LPC on a bus tour, is that correct?
That is correct, but the dialogue first began with Community Board 10. We started talking with Community Board 10. We showed them the changes that we had made to their plan, and we developed a partnership in which we would work as an advisor to the Landmarks Committee of Community Board 10, and it was like a good collaboration. And it was through that collaboration that we decided to sponsor a bus tour of the districts that we were interested in getting designated. And the senior staff of LPC accepted, And so it was like a great tour. They really enjoyed it. So we took them to each one of those districts that Angel discussed and showed you photos of. And they were, I don't know if they had ever been to Harlem in that way and seen those neighborhoods, but they were quite impressed. So then the ask became, well, narrow it down. And Angel was, talking about, well, do we deal with the low-hanging fruit, or do we deal with what is threatened, imminently threatened? And so we did narrow it down to 4 historic districts and proposed historic districts, and 4 individual landmarks, and one included an exterior and an interior, which was the Hansborough Pool, which is a pool located at 135th Street in a Parks Department building that was once, it was built as an auditorium, and it is just absolutely gorgeous. The tile work of the pool, the skylight, and one of the few pools in New York City that has a deep end. Most pools that are built by the city now are only 4 feet deep, I guess, to protect the liability of people drowning. So this pool actually has a deep end, and it's absolutely gorgeous, but it's under threat of perhaps being altered because of improvements that Parks Department think they're making, but they're jeopardizing the integrity of the site itself. So we took them to all of those places, and then they asked us for a list. And we were quite pleased that they did pick one, but also a little startled that they picked the smallest one, which was 130th to 133rd, but they left out 2 blocks, and they did 130th and 131st. And we appealed to them to say, look, we feel that it's a small district to begin with, and to leave out 2 blocks is, like, not the way we think it should go, and that you should reconsider what you have decided and add blocks back in. So they added 1 block in, but they left out 1 block, which was 133rd, and 133rd is the block that included all of the speakeasies during Prohibition. And historically, I mean, the architectural integrity was good, but also historically, a lot of entertainers got their starts at some of those speakeasies. And for example, Billie Holiday's first gig was at one of the speakeasies on that street.
And so you started out, you had a suggestion for a historic district. You had 4 actually. LPC came back to you with the smallest and actually shaved something off of it. And they didn't originally have 132nd. And I think, Rachel, this might've been when you came into the story, because you're the block president on 132nd Street. Is that correct?
Yes, that is correct. I think, when I had first purchased my house, I'd heard rumors of potentially this block being considered in a district and a few more. And I think that was appealing, but just did feel a bit far off. And I think, when we did, I believe, receive an invitation to a meeting from LPC, they'd already started the process with the other blocks, just informing us as homeowners that they were considering our block and inviting us to a meeting. And of course, I think, I was thrilled. I think we could see, even having just been here a few years at the time, how much Harlem was changing and we certainly felt the threat. So I think to look at our block and then to have this this opportunity, we were certainly very excited, and I was very ready to sort of rally the homeowners on our block to show our support. And I think a bit to sort of what Angel said is that when we went, LPC, we introduced ourselves, and we also formed a very quick bond with them, I think. And I think that was also very important and very helpful in the process of getting us included in the landmark.
Right. And Roberta, I think you live on 132nd as well. You're a homeowner there. And how did you actually get involved in the process? What was your first step?
I think it was probably close to what Rachel just mentioned, and it was finding out that something was happening, and going to a meeting or two, and just seeing what could be done in terms of there were some areas, some parts of the district as presented by Safe Harlem Now that were that they were considering like not including, because people had asked to not be included in those areas. So one was a church, but another building is a building that used to be stables and is now a parking garage. So I got involved in terms of going to the meetings and also going to give testimony, going to talk to politicians for our neighborhood, just to make sure that if there was a way for us to have a cohesive district with the spaces, with all of the buildings that we thought made up our neighborhood intact, then that was what we wanted. And so part of that, it became like a discussion with people who presented other ideas, like some folks who had ideas about why our district should not be part of, be a district, why our area should not be a district. Primarily the old reasons that people have, and sometimes it's based on a little bit of understanding and not seeing how it can work out. But some believed that to be a historic district meant that whatever work you did in your house would cost you more money because LPC would make you do things that you didn't want to do. And so part of the discussions with other folks in the neighborhood was just to explain and to have LPC explain that that's not necessarily always true. And then we also had on our block, on 132nd Street, the garage, which became an example of a building that doesn't want to be a part of the historic preservation, the historic district, for reasons that had to do with what they thought would diminish the value of their property if they wanted to sell it or do something else with it, in terms of having some limits put on how it could be changed or what could happen to it, and they didn't want that. And so it was finding ways to sort of rebut those kinds of negative views of what it means to be in a historic district.
And you had already served as a commissioner.
Yes.
So you'd been on the other side. You'd been there at the hearings. You'd seen the research that came from the research department and what they were looking for in a historic district, and had the advantage of that side. Did that come into play in dealing with answering these questions any?
Well, having some knowledge of what LPC did and still, I guess, continues to do in terms of working with residents who want to have alterations made to their buildings. I understand that it's possible to do some things that you might normally think right off the bat that you can't do. So there are ways to do it. And those are as a commissioner, those were the cases that I was privy to see. So if you were doing renovations work on your building, and you were going to do everything exactly by the book, so to speak, or the guidelines, then you would never come before the commission, the board that is judging and giving you approval to do anything, because you would need it. And so the people that normally I saw were residents who were doing something or wanted to do something that wasn't already defined, right? And so it was those people who were asking for some additional concessions that I realized and saw that it's possible to get some, and that's why they were there. And depending on a lot of things, but how it's presented and what the alternatives are, it is possible to not do everything exactly as it is defined in the book. So there is some leeway. And so I got to see that, so what that is and how that works, so.
And which sort of takes us, well, not sort of, it does take us directly to just architectural integrity, both architectural integrity when LPC is looking at a district, but also architectural integrity when they're considering a change that someone might want to make. So how would you actually, for the folks who are listening, how would you go about just describing architectural integrity? And actually, let me give you an example of someplace that I lived long ago, and that was Richmond, Virginia. And they have this fan district, and the houses were built in the early 20th century. And most of them had porches. But in maybe the 50s, a lot of people started stripping the porches off. And so by now, the porches have been gone longer than they originally were there. So would you say the architectural integrity was sort of what they've been the longest amount of time, or what the architect originally intended when they designed them?
Well, there are a couple of different ways of looking at it. You could say that if your house was part of an area being considered for a historic district, it might matter what other buildings, what had happened to other buildings near your building on either side or on the same side of the street. Because you can define historical integrity in terms of being something similar to the other buildings around it, or still having enough characteristics to identify with a particular era that was important when most of the block was constructed. I think that you can also look at it in terms of what's left in a building when some changes have been made. For instance, one of the things that happened in the 80s and I guess the 90s was that HPD, which controlled a lot of the city-owned brownstones and townhouse projects, buildings, allowed buildings to be repaired without repairing the cornice, and thought it was like, okay, because it saved money. And look, the main thing I think was that they thought it saved money to not repair cornices, right? So you end up with blocks and blocks of buildings that now have most of the features, but didn't have cornices. But the fact that it's missing a cornice, and it may be missing other elements too, if there's still some core elements that you can recognize, I think that you'd have to say that the integrity is there, because there's some things that you can add back later on. And if you add it back, then it doesn't count, I think.
That's interesting too, because in the Audubon Park Historic District, there are between 156th and 157th on Broadway, they're twin buildings that George Fred Pelham did. And one of them, the cornice is stripped and replaced with just cement. The other has the original. So you can actually see what the original was, even though the other one doesn't have it, but they both are designated and part of that historic district. We were talking a little bit earlier about buildings that are no longer there. And this is the Lafayette Theater. Valerie, I think you first brought up some of the buildings that weren't there. Want to tell us a little bit about the Lafayette Theater and what's there now?
Well, the Lafayette Theater historically was one of the first theaters in New York City that allowed African Americans to sit in the orchestra and not in the balcony. Other theaters, like in what is the Broadway district or wherever they were, African Americans had to sit in the balcony. They could not sit in on the first floor for a performance. And sometimes they were banned from sitting in the theater at all. So the Lafayette Theater had this really great history of interracial mingling of the theater arts. And one of the great events they had was when Orson Welles produced the Voodoo Macbeth. And that was like a big deal in Harlem. And with this great director, Orson Welles, doing it, it really put the Lafayette on the map. And just about any notable writer, songwriter, musician, dancer, actor, or whatever at the time came through the Lafayette. And there was a tree, the Tree of Hope, which was outside the theater. And artists used to touch that tree for luck, especially like if they needed a job or if they wanted to get a part in a play, if they wanted to be hired as a musician in a production, they would rub that tree for luck. So when there was this Dutch elm beetle disease in New York, the trees that lined Adam Clayton Powell were all cut down. And so the Tree of Hope was cut down too. But Ralph, I forget his last name, he's famous, but you know, it's, you know, age is a terrible thing for the mind. But anyway, Ralph Cooper, who was the originator of the amateur hour at the Apollo, got a stump from that tree and put it on the stage at the Apollo. And so every time an artist would come out to perform at the Apollo, they would rub that stump, and it's been shellacked. It's still there to this day. And it was from that tree that was in front of the Lafayette. So the area that that the historic district between of 130th to 132nd housed a lot of these artists and creative people who interfaced with the Lafayette Theater. And it was knocked down, and some nondescript condo sits there now. And it's just a great loss to Harlem to have lost that landmark, which was so much a part of the theater life of Harlem.
Both a cultural and an architectural loss.
Yes, it's a cultural and an architectural landmark. It was owned by by a church that then sold it, and has, I believe, their sanctuary within this building that was built. And the church had begun to erode the architectural integrity of the Lafayette itself, but a lot of it had still remained.
And just, if I could just say a word about it, I think also it's, to me, it's like one of our greatest loss in Harlem, because it's a building that had already like made it halfway in terms of being recognized. It was recognized by the state, right? And as a landmark building and as a historic, and the district was recognized as a historic district by the state because it was adjacent to that what used to be the theater. And I think, but at the same time, I recognize that it's a difficult kind of problem when you're dealing with something, talking about integrity, right, of the building that has been altered, but the buildings themselves were still there, the exteriors of the buildings, right? But then you're also in a fight with the idea of what can you do versus having development take place. And in this case, and in many cases, most cases, development wins out. And somehow I think that this is like one of the most difficult confrontations that we have as preservationists, is how to save something that you have a difficult time selling to LPC on one hand, and at the same time, the wolves, in this particular case, developers, are standing at the door waiting for a time to snatch it. And so in the end, it's gone, and it's a big loss. But there are others that are in the same state that we should at least work harder to save, I guess.
I think that, and you bring up a really an interesting point about, I think, Harlem and Washington Heights and into Inwood, is that, as Angel was saying earlier, we have so many fewer districts and individual landmarks. And a lot of times an issue does arise about the integrity of the building. And, you know, a lot of these areas are places where for a certain period of time, owners didn't have perhaps the funding or the time or the inclination to keep these buildings up. And so they did get altered in various ways. But as you said, that doesn't mean they couldn't be reclaimed and returned to a semblance of what they once were. Sorry, was somebody getting ready to comment? Oh. We also have the Renaissance Casino and Ballroom, which is there on the screen, which was a similar instance, I believe, that yes. It's now been replaced with something which is entirely different. And not only different from what was in that particular spot, but it also affects the context and the feeling of the entire neighborhood surrounding it. One of the things, though,
Matthew, can I just add something to what you just said there, that image, just to get
sure, back up here,
just to get it out of my chest, and also just to add salt to injury. Then the building has a name, which is the Rennie, and it's something that it stays with me, and it will stay with me for a long time.
It grates at my innards. Okay. That it, and you see these little, I don't know if you can see my arrow on the screen. In the building that's built, those little tiles that are up there, that's supposed to replicate the original tile that was in the original Rennie, and that was supposed to be to placate the community, that they replicated this tile that they thought was that looked like the tile that was on the original Rennie, which they said they couldn't put up because it was full of asbestos.
But also there is a sort of a strange history to this, the building and how this new building came about. The month before I became officially a commissioner at Landmarks, I attended a meeting, a public meeting, where leaders and people from Abyssinia descended onto Landmarks, that meeting, the hearing, to explain why they did not think this building should be landmarked, right? And they explained it as something like, well, you know, it will cost us something extra if you designate it as a landmark. And we don't think that that's necessary because even without the designation, this was Abyssinia and some other well-known figures, public figures, said we don't need it. We don't need the designation because we can assure you that we will treat it as if it is, right? And that we will make sure that it's standing and that we do the things that are needed, but we just don't want to have the landmarks designation, and we would really appreciate it if we didn't. And I think because of the power of some of the people, including a former mayor, speaking, it was not designated, you know.
But they promised that they would they would at minimum maintain the facade, and that promise was broken.
Yeah, no, I guess the conclusion I would take away from that is that is no good, that cannot happen. The building should have been landmarked. You know, that's the only assurance you have. You can't say that, you know, because someone powerful or important people say, don't worry, we'll take care of it, that they can carry that out, right? Exactly. And so it was a shame to just see it happen in pieces, as the whole idea of what could have been just fell into disrepair, and they tore it down.
Matthew, I would like to move to what we encountered, because it was very easy for us to get this historic district designated by LPC. The problem we had was when we were getting ready to have the council certify the designation. That's where we ran into a problem.
Exactly. Let's just spend one moment on the cultural significance of the neighborhood, because I believe that in learning about this from you folks who saw it from start to finish, that one of your concerns was that some of the buildings weren't complete. That they might have been missing a piece or had an addition, or, you know, the steps might be different or something, but that LPC said, well, that's not as big an issue because this is a cultural designation as much as an architectural one. And the cultural significance being, and Valerie, maybe you could explain to our audience the cultural significance here on this particular slide. Okay,
this is 170 West 130th Street, which was the national headquarters for the 1963 March on Washington. That was, the planning effort was headed by Bayard Rustin. So it is also an LGBT historic landmark. And this was where probably one of the most important gatherings for African Americans that changed legislation or created legislation, the Voting Rights Act. And it was planned out of this little building right here, which now doesn't look like even that. But the building has an architectural significance in that the facade of this building was changed altered in 1928 by Vertner Tandy, who was the first African-American licensed in the state of New York as an architect. And it had been a cultural center before that, and they had hired Tandy when they purchased the building to change the facade, and he did that. I think the architects can talk more about what he did architecturally, which was modernize the facade in many ways in 1928 from, and it had been a brownstone.
Great, thanks for going through that, because I do think that's really an important aspect of this particular historic district.
Oh, and by the way, Save Harlem Now, in conjunction with Ewan's organization, we did a salon, a virtual salon about this building, and had a panel discussion conducted by people who actually worked in the building, and one of them are volunteered in the building, and one of them was one of our board members, and Lynn Hindy. And if you'd like to see that, go to our website at safeharlemnow.org, and you'll have a link that will take you to this really important salon. I'm very proud of it because we were able to gather some of those people together who are now like in their late 70s and their 80s, who could talk about what it was like to be in that building then and what it was like to be in Harlem and what was happening in Harlem at that time. It's a very important piece. So if you haven't seen it, please go to our website and hit the link.
Very good. Thanks for that reminder, Valerie. We're coming up on the hour. We have a little bit more, probably about 10 minutes more. So our audience has stayed with us. I hope you'll stay with us just a little bit beyond the top of the hour as we go through the rest of our slides and discussion here. One of the steps, and Valerie, you were just saying that working with the community board was a pretty straightforward proposition. You had their support in this. And you were moving forward. You actually went through the whole calendaring process at LPC and through the testimony. And then it was when you got to the city council, which a lot of people don't realize is the next part of it, that being designated by LPC is towards the end of the process, but it's not the very end. The end of the process is going through some committees and then having a vote by the city council. And that's when this garage that had been a stable came into the picture.
Right. And it was such a shock. Actually, in the first subcommittee that the consideration for the historic district was brought up, we lost. And they voted it down, but it had to go to another committee. And it was at that time, in fact, Simeon, head of HDC, was at that meeting, and he said, well, I guess it's over. And I said to him, it's never over till the fat lady sings. So, so that's when I dug in my heels, and Save Harlem's dug in its heels, and we decided to fight. And that's when Rachel got much more involved, and she can talk about what she did, and then we can talk about what we did together.
So, and Rachel, that did sort of bring your block into action, didn't it?
Yeah, it did. I think, I mean, we went to, they said all the LPC meetings, and then, you know, then it's like, then there's a hearing. So we went to the hearing for the first time. So it was definitely a learning process for us. And I think you start to see some of the same people. And I certainly started to see Save Harlem Now. And I think, you know, that's when we as a block started to hear that the garage really wanted to be left out, and that they had lobbyists working for them and lawyers who read all this very lawyerly testimony. And I think when we went to City Hall, I think we very much like Val was just of the opinion that we will just keep fighting and we won't stop. And I think having the community board definitely checked in with us. So I think that was, again, another part of the link where just as a community, as a block, we were able to feed our input into them and let them know that the vast majority, and like everyone on the block, wanted this building to stay in, so that, you know, the homeowners themselves wanted this to be part of the district and not to be carved out. And I think that's really too, when, I don't remember exactly, but I feel like it was, I think at the LPC hearing, and then as we went to City Hall, where, you know, we started working with Val, and I think they, and, you know, the Save Harlem Now organization at the time helped to educate us. And then we were working from the community level. So we started a petition. We knew where to advertise that within the neighborhood, because I think it felt exciting for homeowners to think we're finally getting some more landmarks in Harlem, because we saw, I think, again, how much the neighborhood was changing and how much we really thought our area was special. And by that time, I think became so much more educated on also all these cultural significance. I think I didn't know at first the political part. I knew some of the more entertainment aspects of it. And so we really worked from that level. I say we were kind of the grassroots. We were able to move the the homeowners themselves and the homeowners in the neighborhood to lend our voice. And then we had Save Harlem Now, who were able to also help us. And I think we certainly couldn't have done it without them. You know, I think you anywhere you go, you need to know the system, and working at City Hall wasn't a system that as a homeowner I really knew anything about. And so it was really, you know, I think from photocopying, I don't know, what did we hand out, Val? We just really, that's when we started to really work together. And I think we really appreciated their guidance and their education. And, you know, there were a lot of other preservationists there, but it was really, it was so, I mean, we couldn't have done it without that support. So it was, that's what we brought, I think, from the homeowners, and just to say that the homeowners can fight and can rally and can accomplish a lot.
Yes, and so then we started lobbying various council people who were on committees. And then our own council person stood up for us. And there he is with me, my finger up, that's me when I had locks, and with Bill Perkins. Bill Perkins saved the day because, you know, it's a rule of thumb in the council that if an item is in a council person's district and they support it, then the rest of the council has to fall behind the council person. And he was adamant that he wanted that building to stay in the district. And so they had to listen to him. There was a pushback at first, but he made it very clear that he was supporting this effort. And so that's how we were able to get it through the council, because there was some heavy duty lobbyists, 2 lobbyists, very heavy duty firms, names you would know, had been hired to keep this, to take this building out of the district. And you know what would have happened had that building been taken out of the district? We would have some high-rise monstrosity, totally out of context piece of junk in the middle of our historic district. And we couldn't let that happen. So that's why the fight was good. We got a lot of support from Councilwoman Inez Barron, who is down in the bottom picture in the blue outfit and hat. We got great support from other community members that didn't live in the historic district, and some of them are pictured up here in the photo with me and Rachel and Michael. But there were many more. So we really rallied people to come out and support us, and we lobbied hard. We sent out flyers telling council people what it would mean if they voted the wrong way. And so we got a unanimous vote on the day that it was taken up during the whole council to keep the building in the district. And so now we have a historic district that's intact with a building that was built as a carriage house and is now a garage. And maybe there will be some kind of adaptive use for that building that will keep the bones of that building, because it has to keep the bones of the building, the facade. And we look forward to what it might become one day.
You know, that's a really interesting point, and a point that I think everyone should take away, Valerie, is that it may seem insignificant at the time that one little building might be left out, but first, you don't know what's going to replace it. And second, there is that possibility of repurposing a building, reusing it in some fashion, and thus keeping the streetscape, the integrity of the streetscape as it is at the time that it's made a historic district. So thinking along those same lines, as we're wrapping up here, what are some of the things that you would say were your lessons learned in this whole process? And Rachel, could we start with you, because some of the things you've said sound like that when you started the process, you really weren't that aware of what was going to happen throughout, and that you actually learned a lot just about how the city operates.
Yeah, I think the takeaway for me is that you need all levels. And I think, you know, from the individual homeowners, and I think, you know, it was an individual owner who we were kind of working to convince, but I think you can see that as the homeowner, again, too, you know, we became very plugged in with community board. And I think we see that now where they continue to reach out to us. So I think that's an important relationship. And I think even just going to the LPC hearings and following that, because the LPC did keep us informed, you know, we couldn't have done it without something like Save Harlem Now. And so I think that's sort of the takeaway for me, is that it takes all levels, and that the community does have a say, even when you feel sometimes like your community who doesn't get listened to. Maybe we don't get listened to enough, but this was one example where we were able to, but again, we needed something like Save Harlem Now to help us organize and amplify and understand where to put our energy. And
Roberta, what was something that might be a lesson learned or something that you would share with the folks who are tuned in on their projects?
Well, I think the most obvious lesson to learn is that, yeah, it pays to, if you're a homeowner, for instance, to get together with others who may have gone through it before or have a little bit more knowledge, because sometimes you're going to need someone with that extra little piece of information. And experience is something like, you know, your district only gets, like, if it becomes a historic district, it's something that just happens once, right? So you really do need to know who you can find in other areas who can help. And sometimes your community board is maybe a place to find out about other people who've done it and how to get in touch with them. But don't be afraid to look for other folks to help you do what you know they've already done successfully. Exactly.
And Valerie, anything you'd like to share also about lessons?
I found out how important it is to collaborate. And this was a collaboration first with Community Board 10, then with the LPC. Don't forget that. And I think that through this experience, our relationship with the LPC has been strengthened. And in it, the way they saw us fight, the council, fight to get this through the council, I think helped us gain some respect with them. But also, getting support from people in government who were supportive and helped in their ways, people in the council who helped not just our councilmen, but other council members, as well as the community. It was quite, I think, overwhelming for me that we had such a collaboration and that this collaboration worked.
And Angel, back to you. What would you say is a lesson learned from this whole process?
I mean, many. Number one, the example of the garage and so on, the whole conversation about the garage, it's important because it illustrates why do we do this, you know, and what is this whole business of landmarking about? And it's about defending, valuing, and but also protecting character and the history of the place, right? So what we just went through in terms of the losses, the Lafayette, the Renaissance Casino, and so on. Harlem it's a place, one of the most significant places in the nation. Forget about New York alone, the nation, and has been unprotected for so long. And I think that this is why you need to have this type of protection, because landmarking not only acknowledges and values those properties, but it also really protects them. So if that garage property owner wants to, as he's doing right now, no longer wants to redevelop the property and wants to sell it, he can do that. and whatever the next life of the building, now we have a mechanism in place that actually allows you to regulate change. And that is why the landmarks law work, because it allows you to protect and regulate change. It doesn't really mean that nothing can happen. Things can happen, change can happen. That building with the painted facade and so on, one of the arguments that they were making was that it's not really part of the district because it was a different building typology and a primarily residential brownstone block with 2 churches. And that is correct, but it doesn't really mean that doesn't really belong to the block, to the neighborhood, and define its character and history. Specifically because what we're dealing with in that space, just right across the street, is a brand new building, which is the building that replaced the Lafayette Theater, right? So this is why we had to do this. The landmarks law works. I think we've proven, it's been proven so many times that it actually really helps to enhance and protect significant cultural values. The other thing that I want to say is that this is just as much as Valerie and everybody else mentioned, this is really about community and collaboration. We are here to enhance and reinforce the effort that lots of people before us had started and to work with local partners, right? We're not the stars here. We're really here to help and to work with others.
That's right.
From the community to the Landmarks Commission. And I think that it's important that becomes clear, because at the end of the day, it's not only about doing the work and wishing what you want and what is obviously necessary and required, but it's also about having a way to do it. And I think that what we're trying to do is just really work with our partners locally and work with the commission. The commission gets a lot of heat for not designating enough, but I think in this case, they've been responsive. And we're very happy to the work that we've done with them on the 130th Street District, and that they also have taken, it's a good slide to show, other steps to designate all the districts, the extension of the Strivers Row and so on, and the Dorrance Brook District that is becoming, it's been designated right now. But look at the laundry list of the districts that are still outstanding. And we're having a conversation only about CB10. When you look at CB9, when you look at CB11 in East Harlem, my goodness, there's so much to be done. So that also, to me, speaks about the need for advocacy, the need to have a community-based preservation advocacy organization like Save Harlem Now, who can actually do the work, because this is tough work that really, as Roberto mentioned, requires experience, and it requires effort, dedication, collaboration, but it has to be done, and it has to be, and it cannot be postponed. So I'm super happy and proud and humble and excited about the work that Save Harlem Now have done, and I look forward to getting more of this done, because Harlem it's too much of an important place in New York, in the nation, and around the world to let it crumble.
Thank you, Angel, and thanks to all the panel. This has been really a really interesting evening, interesting conversation. I'm afraid we're sort of over time, and we're about 7:15, and so we're going to have to end here. But I think this has given a really good overview of how an organization like Save Harlem Now, working with the community, working with the community board, with the city council person, and with LPC, was able to move this, this designation from the start through the finish. And as you see there on the screen, there's plenty of work ahead of us. So thanks everyone for joining us this evening and for staying with us here until the end. And I'm going to turn it back over to Diego to close us out.
Thank you, everyone. It was a very wonderful talk. Thank you for sharing your expertise and your experience. And thank you to all the attendees and for staying until the end. I'm going to send a recording of this wonderful talk to your emails. And I'll keep you posted on other events, other people that we invite. Thank you again to all the panelists. And I look forward to seeing you all soon.
Thank you for having us.
Thanks. Good night.
Good night.
Good night.
Bye-bye.